Hello, my name is Lori Lieblong, and I am with the Arkansas Small Business and Technology Development Center as a small business consultant. I am here with Alicia Funa, who is a small business banker with Arvest Bank, and with Cole Henderson, who is an attorney with Wright, Lindsey, Jennings. We are here to talk to you about starting a business in the state of Arkansas, and hopefully we'll give you a good overview of what it takes to get started as a small business owner. We are funded by the University of Arkansas, the SBA, and some private funders, just to give you an idea about how we are funded. A little bit about us. We put on training seminars about marketing, this seminar on starting a business in Arkansas, financing, and a host of other subjects that are relevant for small business owners. We also have valuable market research. I worked in corporate for 10 years before starting with the ASBTDC. We have information on demographics, psychographics, industry information, and a variety of other market research that can help you understand whether or not your business is feasible. Probably the most valuable thing that we have for individuals is our one-on-one consulting, where we can help you decide if your business is a good idea, whether or not you want to go down the path. We provide marketing consulting, financial analysis, HR consulting, and a host of other subjects. Okay, so what are we going to go through today? We're going to talk about whether or not your business idea is feasible and how you come to that conclusion. We'll go through our business plan template, which is really great and very straightforward. Some other things you need to think about when considering starting a business. And then Cole will jump in with the legal and tax issues from an attorney's perspective. And then Alicia will jump in and talk about financing with a banker's perspective. So they bring a lot of value to this presentation because they have their expertise coming from their areas of business. So when we think about whether or not our business idea is feasible, we think about three things: whether or not there is a market for our product or service, whether or not we have the capacity or desire to manage the business itself, and whether or not we have the money to do it. So when we think about whether or not there is a market for the business, we look at the overall industry. I'm going to use an example. I spent 4 years when I was in corporate, the last corporate job I had in the vitamin industry, and we took on a really strategic project. So it's a really great example for this presentation. So I'm going to use that throughout this presentation. We look at the overall industry that you're thinking about entering. So in this example, we look at the health industry, health and wellness. In general, we all know that now in this century, we have more access to information. So if we look at the health and wellness industry, people understand more about disease states in general and what it takes to live a healthy lifestyle and how we can prevent disease through lifestyle and prevent medication use in order to live a longer life, et cetera. And that drives products and services. So we see more gyms pop up, more athletic wear, more niche athletic activities. So we've got Pilates studios, yoga studios, people pursuing triathletes. That also drives certain food trends and vitamins, for example. So that was the industry I was in. So there we see industry driving forces driving demand for a certain product, vitamins in this example. You also want to look at your competition and competitive forces. So I worked at a drugstore, worked on a drugstore chain for a manufacturer, and our competition was like Walgreens, Walmart, Sam's Club. And we had a niche opportunity to create products following food trends for our particular retailer, where we saw our market of customers who are buying health and beauty products at our store buying vitamins at specialty retailers. And we saw an opportunity to follow those trends and capture those customers in our stores. And I'll get into that later. In addition, you want to look at market size and market share to see if there's really enough money out there for you to even pursue your business. And we've got great market research. It's called BizMiner, where we can look at the market volume in our area or the geography where you're looking to pursue your business and see what is the total market volume. Are we looking at $100,000 out there, or is it 2 million? And if it's 2 million, okay, maybe it's worth it. If it's only $100,000 and you need to make 500 for this to work for your family, Okay, it's not a good idea for you. We can look at startup market share to see if it's even worth it in terms of standard market share through this research as well. And then some businesses have a target market share. Walmart, for example, in some categories has a target market share of 30%. If you've got a market share target and an industry volume has a certain $500,000, then it may not work for you. So those are some of the things you want to consider when you look at the dollar volume in the market. The other thing that you need to consider is, do you really want to do this when you look at all the things that you have to do in order to run a business? So you're going to be responsible directly for overseeing or doing all of these things. So marketing, that may seem like pressing a button on a few social media channels. It's not. It's coming up with a marketing strategy and a brand strategy. So what sets you apart? Setting a marketing budget, developing a long-term marketing plan, managing it, executing it, coming up with a budget, spending it, making sure you don't overspend, targeted marketing so you're not doing a shotgun approach. With big budgets, that may be a full-time job for someone. And so you've got to decide, okay, do I want to do that? And if I don't, can I spend the money to pay someone else to do it? Managing finances is not just bookkeeping so you can accurately pay your taxes. It's a lot more than that. It's performing accurate financial analysis so you can make sure you're running a profitable business that's growing every year. And that requires a lot of data analysis. And if you don't like doing that, you need to be prepared to pay someone else to do it. In addition, you're also looking at operational efficiency down in the weeds or having someone else do it. Some of the most successful business owners I know are walking the floors of their business on a regular basis. They're not up in, somewhere else doing something else. I know some business owners and I see them in their franchise on a daily basis. I like to use the example of these kale salads, and I've been using this since I've been doing this presentation for 9 years, but I make these really robust kale salads when I make them myself, and no restaurant in town would be able to afford them and make a margin on them. But say let somebody does, and they're outsourcing their kale from a regional distributor. And they find out from their chef that they're actually having to throw out part of this kale because it's coming from a regional distributor is going to waste. So they find out they need to find a local distributor, and they're losing a little bit, or they're actually coming out net positive coming from a local distributor. Well, they wouldn't know that without having a conversation with the chef. So you're having to stay in the weeds and looking at operational efficiency and make sure you're doing that. In addition, you need to be really involved in who you're hiring and managing people. In small business, it's important not only that you get the right people in the right job, but that you're also flexible and adaptable and that everyone gets along. I mean, we work on a small team. And it's important that we all kind of jive to get things done in a small organization. In addition, you have to have the money to do it. This is probably the first thing I get people started on when working with clients, is to make sure the funds are there. And so we look at startup costs, and this goes from the pens and pencils you're going to buy for the office all the way up to equipment and build out for renovations or land you're going to buy. Every single dollar that you're going to spend to get started. And then how much money do you have to invest? Alicia will get into this in terms of what kind of money you need to put down for a loan, but you're going to have some of your own money. You can't do 100% financing, or don't assume that you can. We can work with you. We've got a really robust, but it's easy for you. It's in terms of, a little bit of data entry, financial statements. And if you're not familiar with financial statements, it's perfectly fine. No one expects you to unless you have a history of working with them. But projections on sales, what kind of money you're going to make, and then what kind of money you'll have left over at the end of the month, like a checking account in the way of financial statements, to see if this is actually going to make money. And then you also start thinking about, what are your funding sources? Are you going to fund this with your own money? Are you going to borrow from a bank? Are you going to take on investors? How will you fund this? And then if all three of those things are a yes, there is a market for it. You do feel like you can do it. And then when you look at this financing, if the things that you don't want to do, you can fund, and you have enough money to do it, and you can fund it from other sources if you can't fund it all yourself, and it's a go, you start working on a business plan. So I get a lot of clients, and this is not a criticism to people at all, because it's probably what I would go to first if I didn't know about our center, is Google business plans, which are really complicated and a lot of work. Ours is very straightforward. The contents are what are important, and there is no right length to a business plan. It's just important that the information is there and it's thorough. But it's very straightforward. There's an executive summary, which you write at the very end. We go through your products and services, talk about the market, the industry, operations, and the financial plan. And so I'm going to go through each of these and discuss them and explain them. But this is a really simple, straightforward business plan that hits all the nuts and bolts. That's really easy to write. The first section is products and services. First and foremost, it's really important that this is in layman's terms, because you don't want to expect that your audience is going to understand what your product is. Sometimes we get clients that have very complicated businesses, and it's important, especially if you're going in for bank financing, that you make this digestible for your audience. So for example, the products that we decided to launch were based on food trends. So vegan, all natural, 100% preservative-free, 100% organic, based on the fact that people were buying foods like that. They wanted their vitamins to also have those attributes. So we would explain that in this products and services section. We were selling in-store and online. We were priced at a premium above the rest of the vitamins in our store and at parity with these specialty retailers. And then we were priced by the unit. Gasoline, for example, is bulk pricing. So that's how you would structure this, is explaining that. And we might go into detail about what organic means and the specific certification that requires, but we would keep it in layman's terms so that it was easy to digest for someone reading it. The second piece is the market. You want to get into, this is a really important piece, and you back it up with market research, and we've got really great market research where we can hone in on your market and tell you if there's enough people in the area, what behaviors they have, and what type of psychographics there are for the specific type of person you're looking to sell products to. But ours, for example, were women exercising, 4 times a week, eating healthy, certain age group. I think they were like 30 to 45. But these are behaviors, attitudes towards your products or services, demographics like age, amount of products or services they're buying. Then you want to have a solid brand strategy. So what set us apart is people were buying our health and beauty products in our store, but buying specialty products elsewhere. And so we offered the ability for them to buy health and beauty products and specialty vitamins all in one place. We did a competitor analysis and knew that our competition was not offering this, and it gave us a way to capture share from these specialty retailers. We then developed a marketing and creative strategy around what you put into your body matters, and then developed a sales strategy and product development strategy around products that would fit into the assortment for our different retailers. When you're making a location decision with us, we run really good research around where people are buying products around your location. We look at traffic count, how many people are running, and then what kind of competition is around your location. And then a lot of it too is like intuitive. We're all residents of Northwest Arkansas and know the area really well, and can kind of tell you, like, there's stuff to really consider, like parking, for example. And then kind of brand. What does your brand live in a particular location? And then all of this is also related to our market research. The second piece, industry, is really important. We've got some really valuable industry reports. We've got interns that can really dive into other articles and information to drive the industry. It's really important to understand sales and marketing in your industry. So for example, for the vitamin industry in that class of trade, the drug channel does a lot of buy one, get one. In vitamins, we also had a protein business where they were connected to fitness models. But in vitamins, it's important to market to realistic models. And one of the things that was really big was expert endorsement. If your doctor tells you to take a certain vitamin, that's really believable and really does something for the purchase behavior for the customer. Um, and then it's also really important when you're thinking about social media, and I'll get into this too, to do it really targeted. You do not want to take a shotgun approach to your marketing. And you can, when you look at the industry, you can really kind of make some calls about your marketing. You also want to pay attention to finance and regulation. In the vitamin industry, we were not regulated by the FDA, but we were heavily scrutinized, and so it was really we had to be really careful in our advertising. The weight loss supplements were really popular, but we couldn't make the claim about weight loss. We had to say stuff like body composition and stuff like that. So it was kind of like our hands were tied. In addition, finance is something that really is important. I worked in another industry where state taxes were different in every state, so that affected pricing. In addition, look at business challenges. I interviewed with Duracell at one point, and everything has a charger now. So I always wondered, what do they have in the pipeline? If it's a battery company, I don't think that company is going to go under, but like what pipeline plans do they have to mitigate the fact that everything's got a charger? Are they entering the charger business, or what's going on? And then industry opportunities. For us, the industry opportunity was to jump on the bandwagon for those food trends. Whatever people are ingesting with food, they wanted to ingest with vitamins. And then the next piece is operations. This kind of seems like an unimportant point, an unimportant part of a business plan, but it's actually really important because it sheds a lot of light on some other things and can actually shift what you plan on doing in your budget and in your products and services. So I like to call it people and processes. You'll include the key people in the business, their qualifications, how much you're going to pay people, the organization chart, who's going to do what, but really get into the nuts and bolts or the day-to-day operations of the business. Literally, when are you going to open? When are you going to close? Who's going to do what? Who's going to wipe down the counters? It's going to generate your list of startup expenses and your expenses each month. It's going to help you understand the details of your products and services. And so it may shift some of that stuff. It may help you realize, okay, we actually need this and this is going to cost this much. Okay, we can't really afford that. We need to switch it out with this. And so it's actually a really important, while tedious exercise, it's very important because it sheds a lot of light on a lot of different things. And finally, and this is where our financial tool really helps, is the budget. What do your pro formas look like? How much money do you need? What does it cost? And then are you going to be profitable? And that's the last piece of the business plan, but that's going to be what you bring to anyone who's going to help finance this. And it's, essentially what makes sure that you can do this. Then you'll write the executive summary. This is a summary of the rest of the business plan. It is what someone's going to read first to decide if they want to read the rest of the business plan. So it's important that it's concise. This says limit it to 1 or 2 pages. I think that's important. You're going to have a company description, and then you'll have the highlights of the products and services, your customer, your marketing strategy, the competitive position or what sets you apart, the operational component or management team, and the financial component. So you also need to consider business insurance. I worked with a marketing consultant years ago in New York, and you wouldn't think about a marketing consultant needing insurance, but she made a mistake working with a manufacturing company, and it cost the company about $250,000. And she had insurance that covered that, and it ended up being fine because of this insurance. And you wouldn't even think about somebody like that needing insurance. So it's really important that you have insurance. So property and casualty and general liability. Property casualty protects you. General liability and product liability protect other people. General liability protects like property. Product liability protects you if your product hurts someone. Workers' compensation protects workers. Business interruption, if there's like a tornado or some kind of disaster and your business is interrupted, you can recoup revenue. And then key person or life insurance protects if someone important or key to the operations of the business is deceased and interrupts business. It's important to know employment laws. You don't want a human resources issue on your hands. Understand the differences between an employee and an independent contractor. Employees are using the goods of the employer, and their hours are set by the employer, and their work duties are set by the employer. Independent contractors are using their own goods. They set their kind of the way they're going to do their work in their own hours. I think Cole will get into this a little bit more. There's a little bit more to it than that. You need to know the proper practices for interviewing, hiring, and firing. This is where you can get yourself in kind of some trouble. Personnel manuals or handbooks, as well as employment and temp agencies, can help with this. They know and are experts in some of the rules here. Manuals and handbooks are good. They're not only good from a legal standpoint, but they're also just good for employees to have some guidelines on how they're supposed to do their jobs and what their rules are. Some things to consider about home-based business. You need to make sure first if you can do it. There may be some neighborhood POA rules that you have to follow. There also may be some city guidelines on whether or not you can do business out of your home. So you need to call your city or county to make sure you can do business out of your house. There are tax advantages. You need to talk to an accountant, but you can write off some of your business expense or your home expenses. That's an accountant question. You also need to make sure you have proper insurance coverage other than your homeowners or renters. So you need to talk to the insurance, whoever insures you for homeowners and insurance. You need to think about mail delivery and telephone. Do you want this to be your personal, or do you want to have something separate? That's something I would seriously consider. And then marketing your business. This is really important. You want to invest. You need to have a clear-cut brand and marketing strategy. I talked about this with the vitamin example. You need to make sure you have a forward-looking marketing plan and budget. Don't do a shotgun last-minute approach. You want to sit down, have a year ahead plan, or quarterly plans, set a budget so you know how much you're going to spend and what you can afford, that it's targeted against your customer, it's on strategy. You need to have a website. A lot of people think just a social media site is fine, but most of us get on Google to find something, and then we skip over everything that doesn't have a website. Social media is great. You're going to wear yourself out if you try to do every social media platform, and you're not going to reach everybody. If you're B2B, LinkedIn is probably the best thing. If you're targeting younger consumers, some of the newer social media platforms are probably better. If you're targeting older consumers, Facebook is probably better. It also depends on the product you're selling. Some are more visual, but it's important that you really use targeted social media. One, it's going to reach the consumers you want to reach, but it's also going to save you a lot of time and effort. And don't underestimate the importance of in-person networking. When people know you and like you, they are much more likely to want to do business with you. So I'm going to turn it over to Cole, and he's going to talk about the legal aspects of starting a business. So I will stop sharing.
I'm going to try to share my screen now. Hopefully this works. Working?
Yes.
Oh, why I started on this slide. All right, I tried to start it on my slide and it's not working. Here we go. Okay. As I already said, my name is Cole Henderson. I work at Wright, Lindsey, and Jennings and Rogers. I do mainly transactional business type work. I help a lot of startups kind of get going, get their business formed, look over contracts, basically anything they need. On that front, as a disclaimer, this is not personalized legal advice. You should consult an attorney and a tax advisor, and your personal affairs, and nothing in here is intended to be legal advice from me to you. So today we're going to talk about main types of entity structures, just kind of making sure that you choose the right entity for your business. We'll go through some tax issues, talk a little bit about investment, not much, and just other kind of business commercial contracts and issues that arise, and ways to protect yourself as an owner and founder, and especially when you bring in other parties to, whether it's an employee or an independent contractor, as Lori said, there's reasons to do one or the other. Kind of different considerations based on your type of business and many other considerations. But the fact that you're watching this and thinking about these things is a good start in the right direction. So with that said, first question, why should I care? The main reason is you want to protect your personal assets. You don't want to get into business, get sued, and be conducting business as a sole proprietorship because you didn't incorporate, and therefore you have unlimited liability to you and your family's personal assets. The reason you hire an attorney is to typically put a clear process in place for disputes. We'd like to think about it, my litigation partners may see it differently, but you can spend a little bit of money on the front end to make sure that things are done right and things are papered correctly to hopefully avoid dispute and litigation with business partners or potentially third parties down the road. So that kind of helps with easing administration and avoiding litigation. Tax benefits, there's certain benefits available to small businesses via the tax code. Transferability of ownership. I like to, the main way that this rears its head in many ways, but the main way I like to explain this to new clients that have never gone into business before is you don't typically want to, if you have a business partner, go into business with their spouse if they were to get divorced, or if they die. You don't necessarily want to go into business with their estate or their heirs. So there's things that you can do on the front end via documentation to basically provide mechanisms by which your ownership or their ownership may transfer so that everyone only does business with who they intended to do business with whenever they first started out. Managing cash flows, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but just being aware of your contract terms and commercial contracts, knowing how soon money's coming in, how soon you've got to pay money out to vendors and suppliers, and just making sure that those things are cohesive in a way that you don't get in a bind where you're floating cash and put yourself in a bad position. And finally, protection of intellectual property. This is important for some businesses, very important, and other businesses, they may not have any intellectual property, but if you're developing or you have developers that work for your company to develop IP, you want to make sure that your company owns it and doesn't basically exceed ownership of the intellectual property to developers because they don't have firm contracts in place. So in terms of structuring your business, there's four, this is kind of a generality, but there's four basic structure types. The first two, mainly the first one is a lack of structure. A sole proprietorship is one person going into business without forming any sort of legal entity with the Secretary of State. As I said, that subjects you to unlimited personal liability. There's no real reason to do that other than the fact that it's easy to administer and cheap because you don't have to do anything. A partnership, if you don't incorporate at the state level with Secretary of State in any manner, and you have more than one person engaging in business for profit, that is a partnership. You do not want to be a general partnership. General partners have unlimited liability. We never form those personally. So corporations and limited liability companies are the main vessels for forming entities. Corporations are kind of the tried and true old entity. Limited liability companies are by far and away the most common entity that I form these days. They were created a bit later than corporations. They're a relatively new creature. So those are the main kind of entity structure. But if you take anything away from this slide, just know that you do not want to be a sole proprietorship and you do not want to be a partnership, a general partnership at least. So sole proprietorships, as we discussed, this is little Timmy here. He is a sole owner of his little lemonade stand. He didn't speak to us, so he didn't form an LLC. Therefore, he is a sole proprietor, or a sole proprietorship rather. He's a person engaging in business activity for profit. He and his business are not separate and his assets are at risk. So if he poisons the neighborhood with his lemonade, they can sue him for his bike and candy and cards and whatever other assets that he has. As I said, it's easy to administer because there's really nothing to do. There's no rules, but there's also no benefits to this structure. So would not recommend. A general partnership, as I discussed, this is 2 or more people engaging in a business for profit. Also pretty easy to administer, but no protection from a liability standpoint. It can be easy to withdraw cash, but just overall, it's not something that we recommend. You can be sued now so now Timmy's got these business partners. Not only can he be sued for his actions, but he can also be sued for his business partner's actions. And so, if Timmy causes a wreck on his bike when he's going to get more lemons, all of his business partners' assets are at risk at this stage. So the rest of this presentation is going to be actual entities that are legal creatures of the legislature. You file a document with the Secretary of State to create them. They provide you liability protection to an extent. And so we'll kind of go into some of these and what they mean and the benefits of each one. So a corporation is legally separate from its owners. You form a corporation by filing articles of incorporation with the Secretary of State. That's going to list the number of shares that you issue or that the corporation issues, classes of stock if you have multiple classes of stock, whether they have a par value. These are kind of the tried and true entity that have existed for a really long time. As I mentioned, LLCs didn't exist. They didn't exist in Arkansas until 1993. Before then, everybody used corporations because that's just kind of what you did. There was a lot of laws, rules, case law have developed over time for corporations. LLCs are generally more flexible, and we'll kind of get into why later. Corporations have a lot more formalities. You've got to have shareholders elect a board of directors. Board of directors then appoint officers, and so there's kind of a chain of command. There's a requirement to have an annual meeting. So there's a lot of formalities with corporations that sometimes are a bit too much for one person to administer, but every situation is different. There may be variables that lend themselves to just starting as a corporation and not going the LLC route. One thing that you might kind of hear whenever you talk about corporations, particularly C corporations from a tax perspective, which I'll get into in a little bit, is this concept of double taxation. So this essentially means that if the corporation has $100,000 of profit, say in a year, the corporation is going to pay tax on that profit at the 21% current tax rate at the corporate level. And then if those profits are then distributed to the shareholders, they will then pay tax on those distributions at their marginal rate. And so that's a reason that some people steer clear of the corporation, because they want to avoid or double taxation. But it's not necessarily the end all be all for every business owner. S corporations, this kind of requires us to distinguish a little bit between legal aspects and formalities versus tax aspects of an entity. So S corporation, it's an election that you make if you're an eligible entity with the IRS. You get what's called the S corp designation from the IRS. There's no double taxation. It's a what they call a pass-through entity. So in the prior example, if your entity's taxed as an S corp, that $100,000 of profit, the corporation doesn't pay tax. At the corporate level, it just files an information return with the IRS, an 1120S, which just kind of shows the profits and losses of the entity, and then that income and potential loss passes through to the owners. The owners will be taxed on one kind of detriment is that the owners will be taxed on profits allocated to them, whether they're actually distributed or not. And so that's one thing that people are sometimes surprised to learn of. There are very strict restrictions on ownership for S corporations. And so you've got to be subject to some very minimal exceptions. You've got to be an individual. An entity cannot be a shareholder of an S corporation. They have to be U.S. individuals. There can only be one class of stock, which can get very complicated, but essentially that means that on liquidation of the corporation, there basically can only be distributions in accordance with the ownership of the owner's percentages. So it can limit flexibility, particularly when companies are interested in taking on investment in the future. One reason that a lot of CPAs will tell you to elect to be an S corporation is that there's some self-employment tax benefits that can be reaped here. So when you're W2 employee, for example, you pay 1/2 of the payroll tax. But when you're self-employed, you are the employer and the employee, so you pay all of that 15.3% on top of your marginal rate. That's a surprise to many business owners. There are games you can play a little bit with within reason to kind of minimize your self-employment tax exposure if you're an S corporation by bifurcating between a salary, a reasonable salary for your services, and the remainder of your distributions being taxed as distributions and not wages. So although there can be benefits to being an S corp, particular tax benefits, there are things that you want to be aware of, especially as I mentioned, like if you are seeking like legitimate investment in the future. Most investors, especially private equity, venture capital, they're going to want to invest via an entity, so that may not work. And there's ways to go around it, but that might lend itself to not choosing to be an S corp, as well as owning real estate. That can get complicated. You can certainly own real estate in an S corporation, but if you ever own appreciated real estate and you want to distribute it out without actually selling the real estate, that can cause some unintended tax consequences without even actually selling the property. So those are things just to be mindful of whenever you're making that kind of initial determination. So limited liability company, LLC, this is by far the most popular entity that I form. Kind of to illuminate a little bit more on the entity versus the tax aspects distinction that I made earlier. So our current tax code that we use was enacted in 1986, which was 7 years before LLCs were invented. So they were not mentioned as a tax classification. It's simply a legal vehicle that was created by our legislature. It can be taxed as either a disregarded entity if there's only one owner of the LLC, aka a member. And there's no elections made on a tax front. It'll be a disregarded entity, so those will just flow through on your individual tax return. And the tax code basically disregards their existence. If there's more than one member and you make no elections, that will be taxed as a partnership. You can also elect, as we talked about, to be taxed as an S corp, and you can also even elect to be taxed as a C corp. Most people don't do that. And so when you form your entity, you will file a form with the IRS if you do not want to be one of those two default classifications. There's some elections, like an S corp election. Generally, you have 2.5 months to file that election if you want that tax classification to be retroactive to the date that you formed your entity. You can still make the election afterwards, but it won't be retroactive to your date of formation. LLCs are extremely flexible. They're pretty easy to set up, a lot less formalities than a corporation. I know we charge a decent amount less to form an LLC versus a corporation, because this really only involves about 2 documents versus a corporation, which tends to involve at least 7 or 8 documents to kind of cover all the formalities that are associated with it. LLCs are typically, or not typically, they're always either manager managed or member managed. I like to set up my LLCs typically as manager managed, because this allows you flexibility. If you ever want to bring in employees, consultants, service providers, and grant them some level of equity as an incentive, especially if you're kind of pre-revenue and you'd like to give them a stake in the success of the company, but you don't want to just give them complete authority to bind the company, to sign contracts and do other things like that would bind the company. Being manager managed allows them to be members, and the founders can be managers, or one founder or a board of managers that will have the authority to bind the company while still allowing that equity to be granted. And as I mentioned, unless you elect S corp status, there's no ownership restrictions on an LLC. The benefit of these legal entities, the main one that we've discussed is limited liability. Your financial liability, typically speaking, is limited to to your investment as an owner. That can change if you take on a personal guarantee, which I'll kind of touch on a little bit, but and I think Alicia will probably touch on as well. But limited liability, just to say, although it's the main perk, it's not absolute. There are still exceptions for fraud, intentional misconduct, gross negligence, self-dealing. There are ways that you can be an owner in an entity with limited legal liability, and that liability not be limited because of your actions. And so, with that said, limited liability is a gift. So if you abuse it and you don't comply with the laws, you don't observe the formalities that you're supposed to observe, keeping the business separate from your personal assets, you won't get the benefits of the limited liability. You'll often hear what they call piercing the corporate veil, which is basically what I just said. Most of the time this comes in the form of commingling assets or expenses with your personal affairs. So if you don't treat the company separate from your personal situation, then the courts won't either. And so it can be as simple as if you need to pay a personal expense, transferring those funds out to your personal account and then paying those personal expenses. Not only is it a good accounting practice, but it's also preventative measure to avoid compromising your limited liability. This chart is just kind of helpful to sort out some of the lingo with respect to each kind of type of entity, what you file with the state to be formed, what governments or what governing documents kind of govern the corporate affairs, how they're managed, how they're taxed, whether they have limited liability or not. So I won't go through that because we've discussed it mostly, but it might be helpful to review. So some considerations prior to forming your entity. There's kind of two hurdles with on the naming front. First is what the Secretary of State will allow you to use, because your name has to be distinguishable from that of any other entity that's in existence on their records. And then two, is someone else using that same name in the same industry in a different place? That kind of raises trademark issues. You want to make sure that someone's not using that name before you start, because you don't want to run into issues. And when you start up, no one's probably going to notice. No one probably cares. You could probably open a restaurant called McDonald's, and when you're small, maybe perhaps no one even knows. But when you get successful, you are absolutely going to get a cease and desist letter from McDonald's telling you to stop using their name, or you're going to get sued. And so just because the Secretary of State may let you form an entity, that doesn't mean that you technically have the right to use it. And so that's just something that you want to be mindful of. Let's see. As we mentioned, you want to kind of talk through with an attorney and a CPA to determine what tax status might be the most advantageous for you, given your short, medium, long-term goals. That's a very important consideration. We work with CPAs all the time, kind of hand in hand with our clients. They're extremely valuable. Sometimes they can even be hard to find. A lot of them are very busy, but they a good CPA, we always say, will save you more than they will cost you in running your small business. So some key questions for founders, kind of more things to think about whenever you first start up. Just because people don't realize this, a lot of my clients run into issues kind of raised on this slide in many different respects, but it's very, very common. Just because someone leaves your company does not mean that their ownership just disappears, no matter how much you may want it to. So one thing that you can dictate in the governing documents at the outset is if one founder or owner leaves, does the company or the other founders have the right to buy that founder's shares back or ownership back? At what price you can dictate a buyout price based on sometimes the terms on which they leave the company, whether it's voluntary, whether it's for cause, certain things like that. Owners a lot of times are divergent over time. Their interest, their life may take them elsewhere that perhaps wasn't contemplated by the partners at the outset. So just kind of thinking through those things, how things could change, being able to dictate what will happen in the future if certain things that you hope don't happen but could happen. That's the biggest thing that I think we as attorneys can assist with. That comes up every day in my practice because either something wasn't foreseen or someone just really didn't take the time or money to make sure that this was handled on the front end, and now they're having serious problems with people that they no longer are on good terms with. So we'll draft documents to kind of address how ownership may be forfeited or rights of first refusal or what happens whenever someone terminates their service with the company. How day-to-day decisions are made, whether things require a majority vote, a unanimous vote, or whether certain decisions are solely in the hands of one person. How owners may be removed whether as an employee or as an owner. There's interrelation between those concepts a lot of times. How an ultimate sale of the business may be decided. And the biggest thing, a lot of people want to do a 50-50 business because they may be, contributing equal capital with their business partner or contributing equal amount of time. And they, it happens all the time where people just want to be equal. They want everything to be equal. But if you do not address how to break a tie on decision making or in other disputes in your businesses on the front end, the law is not going to give you a good dispute resolution mechanism. It can get very complicated. Sometimes there are real stalemates that can only be solved by either compromise, which at this stage a lot of times is simply not going to happen, or going to court and having a court dissolve the entity or come up with some sort of equitable division. So you certainly, if we cannot recommend enough, if you're thinking about doing a 50-50 business, that's fine, but make sure that there are resolution mechanisms, that tiebreakers. It can be as simple as flipping a coin. I mean, you wouldn't believe some of the things that we put in documents just to make sure that there's not a stalemate that ends up not having a solution. Taxes, you just want to be aware of all these different kinds of taxes that may or may not be applicable to your business. Sales and use taxes, state and federal income taxes, self-employment tax we discussed earlier, payroll taxes, which are generally referred to as Social Security and Medicare, withholding on your employees' wages. Franchise taxes are typically owed in many states. I won't say most, but in Arkansas they are charged. It's $150 each year for the privilege of doing business in the state, and then just other miscellaneous taxes. You may be subject to property tax if your business owns property, excise taxes if you sell certain things or do certain things. So just being aware of the multitude of taxes that your business can be subject to. I won't get into this too much, just to say you may hear some of this terminology if you have a startup that is geared toward taking on investment in the future. There's kind of two types of investment. There's an equity investment. You might hear Series C, Series A, Series B. These are kind of rounds, if you will, of raising capital that build upon each other. When your company just needs money, in a priced round, investors will receive a certain set of equity ownership at a fixed price. They will typically want to negotiate certain terms to protect their investment. And then there's also, other ways that, such as a convertible note or what they call a SAFE, which is a relatively new creature, that are a little bit different from equity investments, but they still can provide the company funding and investors a potential to own a stake in the company. And on that same note, securities compliance is extremely important. If you are considering raising money for your company, definitely consult an experienced attorney that deals in this area, not just a general practitioner. There are steep consequences for not complying with securities laws. They apply to shares, membership interests, convertible notes, all the things that I just discussed on the previous slide. Not only do they have to comply with the SEC rules and regulations, which is obviously on a federal level, but each state also has what you may hear referred to as blue sky laws, which means that you've got to comply with their securities laws as well if you're raising money from an investor that lives in that state. And the penalties can be steep if you run afoul of these rules. An investor can potentially rescind their money, their contract to invest in the company. Most of the time when that happens, the company no longer has the money to pay that back, because that's why they raised the money in the first place, because they didn't have the money. And even officers of the company who participate in those activities in raising that money can be liable. So definitely something to just be aware of. Employee issues, as Lori touched on, and being mindful of whether you're hiring an independent contractor versus an employee. This is a whole conversation on its own. There's a multitude of factors that go into whether someone is an independent contractor or an employee. It's not just title determinative. You can't just put it at the top of a contract and think that that's going to govern a lot of the things that Lori already mentioned in terms of the employees or contractors' freedom to provide their, dictate how their work is going to be done, where they do it, whether they provide their own tools and space to do it, whether they have freedom to work for other people, or whether they only work for you. So just being mindful of those things. Employee handbooks and policies are extremely important. If you do have employees, I don't do that, but we do have people at our firm that draft handbooks and advise on those issues. And there's a multitude of issues that can arise once you have employees and you've got to get rid of them, or something happens in the workplace. I won't even begin to pretend like I know all of that, but just something to be aware of. Employee retention, we kind of talked about it, but there are ways that you can provide incentives other than just salary or bonuses to keep people on, especially if you don't have the money, early on to pay them a ton of salary. And just making sure in employment agreements that, especially if you've got confidential information, trade secrets, proprietary information, you want to make sure that your employees are bound by confidentiality and non-disclosure obligations. And a lot of times, if you're afraid of them, taking your employees, taking your clients after they leave employment, having solid restrictive covenants like non-solicitations and non-competes can be extremely useful. And then just being mindful of the contracts, different types of contracts that you may need or encounter through your business. If you lease real property, or if you own real property and lease it to someone else, I'll talk a little bit more about those in a second. Just commercial contracts in general with vendors and suppliers versus your customers. The other ones we just discussed: employment agreements, non-disclosure agreements, privacy policies in terms of use, particularly if you're running a website or collecting personally identifiable information or anything like that. You want to make sure that you're squared away on those fronts and protected. And then shareholders agreements and buy-sell agreements, kind of things that I'll also discuss in a little bit that we've kind of touched on. So commercial real estate leases, I'll just say that this is a huge source of issues for our clients. People enter into them a lot of times. I've seen really, really detailed leases, and I've seen one-page leases. There's really no standard. Suffice it to say that you should totally have someone look over it, especially if you're entering into a long-term, a multi-year lease, which almost everyone is. You want to make sure that you're protected, that whether you're a landlord or a tenant, you've got protections in there that will protect your business. And the commercial contracts, as I mentioned on cash flows, just being mindful of payment terms, whether it's maybe a lot of times you'll see net 30, net 60, basically how you're going to have to pay your vendors or suppliers or whoever you're going to owe money in the course of your business. Also mentioned ownership of IP. You want to make sure that if you've got developers or other service providers, consultants, develop an IP for the company, that your company owns that intellectual property can be extremely important if you're ever going to be acquired or seek investment. They're going to want to know that your company owns that intellectual property that it's using, and not someone else. A lot of people use master services agreements, statements of work and exhibits and things of that nature. Just being sure that someone reviews those to make sure that they are cohesive and that they make sense and that they don't contradict themselves, because those can get really confusing. And the most important thing in most of these commercial contracts is termination. which party can terminate, can both parties terminate, are there penalties, are there notice period requirements prior to terminating, things of that nature are extremely important to be mindful of. I've already discussed non-disclosure, so I won't really get into that too much, but I'll just say that these can allow you, especially if you're thinking about entering into a transaction with another company, you can share information via a non-disclosure agreement that may be sensitive or otherwise non-public, and that can give you, not necessarily a complete peace of mind, but at least a contractual remedy if someone that you're sharing this information with were to disclose it in a manner that they're not supposed to, or against the terms of that agreement. These can be extremely helpful to allow whether it's investors or third parties or potential buyers to do their due diligence on your company and still know that you're not just throwing it out there into the public. And then finally, shareholder agreements and buy-sell agreements is kind of similar to what we talked about in the key questions for founders. But these provide a roadmap for the founders to kind of deal with succession transfer situations that may happen on their death, may happen on divorce. A lot of times, these will limit transfer of stock only to whether, it be immediate family members of the shareholders or to a trust for their benefit. A lot of times they'll carve out certain things that are permitted that don't require, consent from the other owners. We always provide a right of first refusal for the company and then the other shareholders or owners. If someone wants to sell, if you're in business with a couple other people, you don't want them to be able to sell their ownership to some random person and you have no say in it. You'd like the company to be able to buy that from them first and match that offer that they received from someone else. If the company doesn't want to buy it, then the other shareholders should have the right to buy their pro rata share to make sure that they have the overall say of who they're going to do business with in the end. And especially on point C, if you grant equity to an employee or other service provider, you want to make sure that in the event that their service relationship with the company terminates, that the company has a right to repurchase their ownership, because this happens also all the time. If someone leaves the company on bad terms, you don't really want to continue doing business with them, even though they're no longer working for the company. You want to have the ability to make them go away. And that is all I have. Thank you, and I will pass it along to Alicia.
Hello, my name is Alicia Funa, and I'm a commercial banker with Arvest, and I'm going to share some slides with you about obtaining financing for your business. Can everybody see that? Okay. Like I said, my name is Alicia, and I am a commercial banker at Arvest. I am part of the Arvest Benton County market. At the end, I will share some contact information with you, which has both myself for Benton County and Ryan Crawford for Washington County. So feel free to reach out anytime on the phone numbers listed or the emails. So sources of financing. So when you're starting a business, you want to think about, where am I going to get the money to start my business? And so bank financing is typically, can be the #1 source, but probably the most straightforward versus some of the ones listed at the bottom. You will need cash. Cash is king. So even if you obtain bank financing, expect to put some cash into that. You are, you can always take, gifts from family and friends. We'd all like that. And then if you're purchasing, if you're in a type of a business that is purchasing equipment leasing companies is also an option. And then the two less common, venture capitalists and crowdfunding. So venture capitalists would be like a Shark Tank situation. And then crowdfunding is platforms like Kickstarter and GoFundMe, where you can also obtain funds, but much, much, much less common than the rest of them. Just some general comments about obtaining financing. A bank commitment, just make sure that you don't sign any binding agreements such as leases or things like that until you fully secure financing from the bank. because, you know, as we're going through the process, a lot of things can surface or different levels of approval needed. And you just want to make sure that you for sure have that commitment from the bank before you sign anything. If you're working on an SBA loan, the bank will need a copy of the lease, but it can be unsigned, you know, until the very end. So you just don't want to do anything that's going to bind you into any financial commitments if you don't have the money. Don't assume that you can get a loan. And so, you know, things like credit score, personal liquidity, you know, track record with the bank, if you have an existing relationship, like all of those things can play into the loan approval. Because for your business, you know, you will be required to personally guarantee the loan. And so personal credit score does play a factor. Don't expect to get a grant. So grants are also uncommon, and don't expect to obtain 100% financing. So when we go in and we talk about SBA loans, the minimum is a 10% cash injection. So if you look at your total project of what it's going to be to start your business, a minimum of 10% cash is going to be required on that. So we're going to talk a little bit about SBA loans. So Arvest is an SBA preferred lender. And so that means that we can expedite that process for you, and we don't have to have the SBA will check kind of the nuts and bolts of the transaction and make sure that everything complies with their general guidelines, but they're not having to underwrite the loan. And so while SBA loans are fairly time consuming, you know, it is faster to go with an SBA approved lender. So there's really two main types of SBA loans. The SBA, the 7A and the Express really roll up together, but the SBA loans are for eligible borrowers for most business purposes, startup, acquiring, and expanding a small business. Again, that 10% is required. And then on the 504 program, that is going to come into play when you're purchasing real estate. So if you're purchasing a business or you're purchasing a building to house your new business, then the 504 is going to be the best program. And that one can really come with some competitive interest rates. If you're a new business and don't have at least a couple of years of history and financials, 15% down, a minimum of 15% down is going to be required on that. But if you are an established business and you're just looking to move out of that space you're leasing and buying your own building, then the 10% is applicable. So when you kind of first approach a bank and start working with us, really the process with the ASBTDC and us go hand in hand. We're very familiar with their forms, their business plan, the pro forma, and so it makes it a really easy process for us just because we know what kind of data they're helping collect from you. But you know, with Lori, you're going to develop the business plan with the startup cost, the contractor estimates, beginning inventory, utility deposits, you know, whatever is all the costs that are going to comprise your total business plan. And then you're going to create a projection of what your gross sales are, operating expenses. You know, Lori will help you think through payroll, professional fees, marketing, taxes, insurance, legal fees from Cole, the whole thing. And so that will play, you will have to have 2 years. So if you do an SBA loan, then you can do 2 years of projections are required. And so a lot of times it is a guess, but we like to think of it as an educated guess. And Lori and her team can kind of help you think through that process. Their templates will also help you build a cash flow. And so, you know, you might have a seasonal business where some months you're spending more than you're taking in, and it's going to create a deficit. Well, until you build up any sort of business savings, you may have a need for working capital to kind of bridge that gap on seasonality. And then summarizing just your history, you know, why would you be good at running this business? You know, your resume, you know, maybe you're opening a restaurant and you've worked as a waiter or a waitress for the last 10 years. Well, that's very valuable experience. And so we want to know that on your resume. And so we know that, you know, you will understand how a restaurant will operate. And then where are you going to get the cash? So if we need that 10% in, if we need that 15% in, you know, whatever that is, where is that coming from? Just making sure that you have that and you've thought through that. So just kind of back to the small business administration loan. So we can help you with an SBA loan, or we can help you with traditional financing. And so typically SBA loans will help people get a loan where they may not otherwise be qualified. It doesn't mean that we overlook credit score or have a lower tolerance for credit score. It typically means that the cash in is less, and that the collateral, you may not have as much collateral. So if you are opening a business and you're leasing a space and you don't own the space, there's really not a lot of collateral there. And so most of the time, possibly between that, like equipment, inventory, you may not have enough collateral to support that loan. And so that's where that SBA guarantee can help you get into the loan. On a lot of SBA loans, they do require that your primary residence also be secured to the loan. And assignment of life insurance is also very common. And so I think, you know, going into it, knowing that that is a strong possibility, just kind of helps people get comfortable with the idea, because it is something that is likely going to be required on an SBA loan. SBA does allow for longer term financing. So if we could finance a piece of equipment for 5 years, you know, we could put it on an SBA loan for up to 10 years. And so those spaces that you may be opening in a lease space, you need money for leasehold improvements, those can be financed over 10 years. And then we've already discussed other assets that will likely be pledged. SBA loans do have some additional fees. They can come with additional fees or higher rates, but it's not always the case. So in the case of like the SBA 504, you know, part of the attraction to that product is 40% of the project cost is secured at a below market rate. And you can go up to 25 years on that. And then part of it's with the bank for 20 years. We already, so they do look at credit history and scores there. And we already discussed. Now, the bank can require more than 10%, but that is just the starting point. So we have the SBA does not make direct loans. Sometimes they do in the case of a disaster. And so with the tornado that Northwest Arkansas had in May, a lot of the businesses affected by the tornadoes were able to get direct loans from the SBA. Around COVID, that was also something that occurred. But in general, you will work with your bank on the SBA loans. You can go to sba.gov and get information about the programs. And you can also search lenders that are SBA preferred. So our name will come up. SBA does not offer low interest loans, and SBA does not allow balloon notes. So those are just some nuances. The rates are going to be set by the bank, and there's going to be some caps on those. But in general, you know, we are risk-based pricing. And so if it's a riskier loan, you may have a little bit higher rate. And then in the case of if we can secure it to real estate with the 504, you know, you do actually have an attractive interest rate there on part of it. Record keeping is very important. And then that ties into what Lori was speaking to earlier, is that if you are not a finance detailed record bookkeeping person, you need to budget for somebody to do that. That's probably the #1 mistake that business owners make, is that they cannot produce a monthly P&L and a balance sheet. And it is definitely worth the investment in QuickBooks or a like software, or having a bookkeeper. It's just very valuable, because you need to know where you're at all times. I mean, you need to know, you know, what you need to hit that next month in order to be profitable, in order to hit your goals. And so you need, a big part of your day needs to be keeping track of every penny that is taken in and every penny that is spent. So definitely, yeah, consult with, and we can help connect you with bookkeepers and CPAs. And it's just a really, really important part of the process. A lot of times the questions that I will ask our customers when they're starting a business is, what CPA are you working with and what attorney are you working with? because both extremely crucial parts to the process. And then you definitely want to make sure that you're not commingling personal and business funds. It makes it very hard to separate it at the end of the year for tax purposes, and that can get very sticky. And so you definitely want to make sure that you maintain a business checking account, and any type of transfer is really done through a distribution or a paycheck to yourself or something like that. And definitely, yeah, we're here, like, we love relationships. And so, you know, our goal is not to just close the loan transaction and then never see you again. Our goal is to have that relationship. And so when you have questions and when you have things come up, you know, we're here, or we're already discussing those things and we're proactive about it. So it's very important to, you know, in addition to your CPA, bookkeeper, and attorney, to also have a relationship with your banker. And we can also react on additional financing quicker if we maintain that relationship day to day. So in summary, you know, if I was starting a business, I would have a checklist, and I would go through and, okay, how am I paying for this? You know, do I need to get a loan? That would be number one. You know, talk to Cole, choose your legal form of business. And a lot of this happens simultaneously. I think that's really hard for a lot of my clients, because it's like, well, I can't do this until I can't get a loan until I know the legal form of business. It's difficult, but all those conversations just need to be happening simultaneously. You know, complete the startup tax and employer requirements, obtain any licenses and permits. And then, you know, once you are very confident, that's when you would sign any leases and other agreements. And that is all I have for the financing section. So,
So that's it for us. We do send out a survey. So you can survey this this video if you would like. Thank you so much, and we hope this is informative for you. And we really appreciate Cole and Alicia for joining and sharing their information and their expertise. So if you have any questions, contact the ASBTDC or contact Alicia or Cole for their services as well. So thank you.